Kellen grunted as he kicked the malfunctioning comm unit, hoping his boot would somehow inspire a miracle of engineering. The damn thing crackled in response, spitting out static like it was laughing at him. Well, if that ain't music to my ears, he muttered, watching the screen flicker like a dying star. Maybe if you sweet-talk it, it'll play nice, suggested Jax, his wiry frame leaned casually against the bulkhead. His voice carried the kind of sarcasm only an asteroid miner could master after years of inhaling recycled air and watching the same 3 porn flicks on repeat. Or just keep kicking it. Whatever helps you sleep at night, Cap. Kellen shot him a look that could melt unrefined ore. If I wanted advice, I'd ask someone who didn't think a plasma cutter was a toothbrush. Touché, Jax shrugged. Can't blame a guy for trying. The comm unit crackled again, this time forming something that vaguely resembled human speech. Arming event. Earth. Quarantine. Kellen leaned in, squinting at the garbled words like they might rearrange themselves into a coherent sentence through sheer force of will. Well, that's ominous, he said. Sounds like someone's been playing God again. Probably didn't even read the instructions first, Jax deadpanned. You know, I'm starting to think Earth is just one big cautionary tale, added Iris, the ship's engineer, and part-time cynic. She didn't even look up from the mess of wires she was untangling. Do not attempt to terraform on a full stomach, or while operating heavy machinery. Or at all, Jax threw in. Those idiots couldn't terraform a chia pet. Kellen rubbed his temples, feeling a headache brewing like a storm on Jupiter. Alright, let's focus. If Earth screwed the pooch, it's gonna be our problem soon enough. You think they'll make it our problem? If I recall, we're not exactly on their Christmas card list, Iris pointed out, finally looking up from her self-imposed spaghetti junction. We might be quarantined, but we're still Martian citizens, Kellen replied. Besides, there's gotta be a reason why someone up there decided they needed to tell us about this. Jax snorted. Maybe they just wanted to share the misery. Misery loves company, right? And here I was thinking you were the optimist, Kellen jabbed back. Hey, I'm all for optimism. But I'm also a realist. And reality's a bitch, Jax said, spreading his hands wide as if to encompass the universe. Especially when it involves Earth trying to play God with dirt they haven't touched in a century. The comm unit buzzed again, this time more insistently, like a nagging ex who just couldn't take a hint. Mars quarantine. Isolation. Awaiting further instructions. Well, Jax said, crossing his arms, looks like we're sitting ducks. Quarantine ducks, Iris corrected. The kind that no one wants to eat. Kellen sighed, looking around at his crew, the only family he'd had for years. They were rough around the edges, and sometimes just plain rough, but they were his. Alright, let's get back to work. Earth might be playing with matches, but we've got a ship to keep in one piece. You mean, barely held together by duct tape and hope, right? Iris added, her smirk barely visible behind a curtain of grease-stained hair. Hope's overrated, Kellen said, heading towards the engine room. But duct tape, now that's reliable. They settled into their routines, each to their tasks, trying to ignore the ominous shadow of Earth's latest blunder hanging over them like a particularly stubborn hangover. Every clang of metal and hiss of steam was a reminder of the fragile little life they'd carved out for themselves among the stars. Hours passed, the same way they always did in space. Slowly, with plenty of time for regrets and contemplation. Kellen found himself staring out a porthole, looking at the red planet below. Mars, in all its dusty, barren glory. It wasn't much, but it was home. You think they'll fix it? Iris asked, appearing beside him with the stealth of a cat burglar. Earth, not in a million years, Kellen replied without hesitation. But maybe they'll get lucky. That's a nice thought, she said, joining him in his vigil. Nice thoughts don't keep you warm at night, Kellen remarked, finally tearing his gaze away from the planet. No, but they help you pretend the heater's working, Iris replied with a wry smile. Kellen chuckled, even though it wasn't really funny. It was all they had. Come on, he said, turning back towards the ship's heart. Let's make sure this heap doesn't fall apart before Earth does. It wasn't much, but it was a plan. And in a universe where Earth could accidentally terraform itself into oblivion, a plan was better than nothing. Kellen stood in the middle of the mess hall, a metal box of recycled despair and questionable cuisine. The food dispenser gurgled like it was trying to decide if it should serve something edible or just give up entirely. He punched the button again, half expecting it to spit out a paper that read, "Find your own damn food." Well, if this ain't a feast for the senses, Jax remarked, eyeing the grey slop that oozed into his tray. You sure we're not being poisoned? Kellen stirred the goop with his fork, wondering if it would fight back. If we are, they're doing a piss-poor job. We're still alive. Alive's a strong word, Iris said, slumping down beside them. Her tray looked equally uninspired. Maybe we should start a garden. Not like we could screw it up worse than Earth. Yeah, all those thriving Martian jungles, Jax replied, shoveling the slop into his mouth with the enthusiasm of someone who'd long stopped caring. Green thumbs they are not. Speaking of screwed up, Kellen interjected, glancing around at the other miners who sat in clumps, murmuring angrily among themselves. We're gonna need to address the state of our collective sanity. They're getting restless. Restless? Iris snorted. They're one static transmission away from mutiny. Great. A mutiny, Jack said, rolling his eyes. Nothing says, productive work environment, like a good old-fashioned rebellion. Can't say I blame them, Kellen admitted. We've got no comms, no idea what's happening on Earth, and no exit strategy. It's like being stuck in a bad marriage with less sex. Sounds about right, Iris said, sighing. At this point, I'd even settle for a one-night stand. Or a distraction. Maybe a riot's what we need. Kellen considered this with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for a root canal. A riot would mean more chaos than we're already dealing with. And, as charming as y'all are, I don't fancy being overthrown. Maybe if we explain the situation, they'll calm down, Jack suggested, though his tone was anything but optimistic. You mean lie? Iris asked, arching an eyebrow. Because the truth is we'll probably run out of food before we run out of problems. Let's call it strategic misdirection, Kellen said, getting to his feet. Tell them just enough to keep them from tearing the ship apart, but not enough to inspire an amateur reenactment of the French Revolution. You're the captain, Jack said, with a mock salute. Lead on, O fearless one. With all the confidence of a man leading a charge into a meat grinder, Kellen approached the largest group of miners. Their faces were hard, chiseled by years of labor and low expectations. All right, listen up, Kellen began, trying to project authority over the clamor. I know you're all wondering what's going on with Earth. Truth is, we don't have all the answers yet. Then what the hell are we supposed to do? A voice shouted from the back, dripping with dissatisfaction. Stay calm, Kellen said, forcing himself to sound more reassuring than he felt. Panic won't get us anywhere but dead. Dead might be a step up, someone muttered, earning a ripple of grim laughter. Look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, Kellen continued. We're in deep, and we're on our own for the moment. But, we've got supplies. Supplies that won't last forever, another miner interrupted, slamming his tray down for emphasis. True, Kellen conceded, but panicking will make them last even less. We're working to get the comms back online. Once we know more, you'll know more. And if they never come back? A woman asked, crossing her arms. Kellen hesitated, then decided honesty might hold more weight than false promises. If they never come back, we'll face that when we get there. But until then, we keep this ship running. We keep ourselves alive. That's a lot of ifs, the woman shot back. Yeah, and we're all getting pretty tired of ifs, Jax added from the sidelines. But unless someone here has a magic wand, it's what we've got. Silence settled over the group like a thick blanket. There was no magical resolution to offer, no fairy tale ending to spin. Just the disappointing reality that they were in the middle of a cosmic joke without a punchline. All right, back to work, Kellen said finally, clapping his hands together. We're not gonna solve anything standing around like a bunch of statues. Grumbling, the crowd began to disperse, returning to their duties with all the enthusiasm of prisoners on a chain gang. Kellen watched them go, feeling the weight of their frustration settle on his shoulders like lead. Well, that went about as well as expected, Iris said, falling into step beside him. Could have been worse, he replied. Could have turned into a full-blown riot. Give it time, she said with a wry smile. People are like pressure cookers. Eventually, they're gonna blow. Then let's make sure we're ready when they do, Kellen said, heading back towards the comm unit. First order of business. Fixing this damn thing. Second order of business, Iris asked. Survive. Everything else is just details. They reached the comms bay where the unit still lay on the floor, mocking them with its silence. Iris knelt beside it, tools in hand. Let's see if we can't coax some life back into this little bastard. Kellen leaned against the wall, watching her work. If anyone can do it, it's you. Flattery won't make this any easier, she said, pulling a panel free to reveal a spaghetti junction of wires. But it'll do wonders for my mood. Then consider it my good deed for the day. With a practiced hand, Iris began reconnecting wires, her brow furrowed in concentration. Kellen watched her work, wishing he could do more than stand around like a useless ornament. How long do you think we've got? He asked, breaking the silence. Till what? Iris replied, not looking up. Till everything falls apart. That's a cheery thought, she said, lips quirking upward. Who knows? Could be hours, could be days. All depends on how much crappy luck Earth's willing to share. Let's hope their generosity has limits. As Iris continued her work, Kellen's mind drifted to the miners again. Their desperation hung in the air like a bad smell, impossible to ignore. They were good people, but fear was a powerful thing. You ever think about what you'd be doing if you weren't here? Kellen asked, more to fill the silence than anything else. Not really, Iris replied, her fingers deftly working through the tangle. Kind of hard to imagine a life that doesn't involve running from one crisis to another. Yeah, this wasn't exactly in the brochure. Brochure lied, she said, giving a wire a sharp tug. But hey, at least it keeps things interesting. Interesting, Kellen repeated, chuckling without humor. That's one way to put it. Just then, the comm unit crackled back to life, spewing static with a newfound vigor. Iris sat back on her heels, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. Well, that's promising. Kellen knelt beside her, adjusting a dial in the hopes of catching more than just random noise. The unit sputtered, then finally, a voice broke through. Repeat, all communication to Earth has ceased. Mars colony, prepare for extended isolation. Further instructions pending. Well, that sounds official, Jax said, appearing in the doorway. And not at all comforting. Kellen exchanged a grim look with Iris. Extended isolation, he repeated. Just what we needed. Guess we better get cozy, Iris said, standing up and dusting off her hands. Could be stuck here for a while. Cozy, Jax snorted. I've been cozier in the back of a rusted-out rover. Kellen sighed, feeling the weight of the message settle into his bones. All right, let's get back to it. If we're gonna be isolated, we might as well be prepared. Prepared for what? Jax asked. A never-ending supply of bad news. Pretty much, Kellen conceded. But at least we'll be together. Together, Iris mused, her tone light but her eyes heavy. Guess there are worse ways to go. Jax clapped Kellen on the back. Lead the way, Cap. We'll follow you into whatever hell this turns into. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Kellen replied dryly. Let's make sure this hell doesn't get any hotter than it has to. As they returned to their duties, the crew moved with a renewed sense of determination, if not exactly hope. They were stuck, isolated, and facing a world of unknowns. But they were still here, still fighting, and still together. And for now, that was enough. Kellen squinted at the static-ridden comm screen like it owed him money. All right, folks, let's see if we can get a signal out to anyone not currently enjoying our hospitality. Maybe someone out there has cable. Or at least a better conspiracy theory than we're all screwed, Jax added, leaning back against the wall with the casual attitude of a man with nothing left to lose. Kellen fiddled with the knobs, which was about as effective as trying to tune in a radio station while falling off a cliff. Come on, work with me here, you glorified paperweight. Iris leaned over his shoulder, peering at the readout. Any luck? Or should I start praying to the ancient gods of technology? Try the tech gods, Kellen muttered. They might be slightly less vindictive. The comm unit crackled, offering little more than the sound of cosmic bacon frying. But then, a fragmented voice punched through the static, barely audible above the noise. Mars colonies. Respond. Experiment failure. Repeat, experiment failure. Experiment failure? Iris asked, eyebrows rising to her hairline. That's not ominous at all. Sounds like they broke more than a few beakers, Jax said, crossing his arms. And here I thought our job was hard. Lucky us, Kellen grunted. Let's see if we can get more details before this thing decides to throw in the towel. They exchanged a look, the kind that said, we're all thinking the worst, but let's pretend like we're not. Kellen turned the dial again, attempting to coax more words out of the reluctant machine. The comm unit squealed like an electronic banshee, but finally settled into something resembling a coherent signal. Attempted to initiate terraforming protocol. Effects contained only to Earth. We repeat, Mars remains unaffected. Anyone receiving, please advise. Kellen's stomach dropped like a lead balloon. Terraforming? You telling me someone decided to play God and forgot to read the instruction manual? Sounds like someone mixed up the blueprints for utopia and post-apocalyptic hellscape, Jax said with a sardonic grin. Iris shook her head. And they call us the expendable ones. At least when we screw up, it's usually just a singular disaster. Well, we better find out if there's anyone else out there who made it through the slip-up, Kellen said. Before we end up as the punchline to this cosmic joke. Assuming they didn't terraform themselves out of existence, Jax said. In which case, we're the only ones left to laugh. With one last adjustment, Kellen's fingers worked the comm unit like a pianist trying to coax a tune from a half-broken piano. He glanced at Iris, who offered a hopeful nod despite the circumstances. Let's try reaching the other settlements, Kellen suggested. See if anyone else has any intel or, heaven forbid, a plan. The comm unit sputtered to life, and Kellen flicked the switch to transmit. This is Kellen from Mars Base Alpha, reaching out to any survivors or colonies. If you're still breathing, we'd love to hear from you. A long pause stretched out, heavy with the weight of anticipation and static. Finally, a garbled response came through. Mars Base Alpha, this is Delta Station. Copy your transmission. Kellen couldn't help the grim smile that spread across his face. Delta Station, good to hear someone's still around. We're getting bits and pieces about an experiment gone wrong on Earth. Can you fill us in? Another pause, this one filled with the sound of far-off interference, like a party you weren't invited to. That's a big affirmative, Alpha. Terraforming project went sideways. Earth, let's just say it's not what it used to be. Understatement of the century, Jax snorted. Kellen nodded slowly, as if the act alone could make sense of the chaos. Any word on how this affects us long-term? Besides the obvious, I mean. Far as we can tell, Mars wasn't hit, Delta Station's voice crackled through. But with Earth incommunicado, we're looking at a long stretch without resupply. Buckle up, it's gonna be a rough ride. Great, Iris said, rubbing her temples. So, the apocalypse is an Earth-exclusive event. How considerate. Kellen let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Thanks, Delta. Keep us posted if anything changes. We'll do the same. Roger that, Alpha. Stay frosty. As the connection cut out, Kellen leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of the situation settle in. Well, folks, seems like we're in this for the long haul. Any volunteers for the Plan Our Survival committee? Jax raised a hand, grinning like a rogue. I can volunteer to make sarcastic comments from the sidelines. And I can lead a gardening seminar, Iris added. Though I'm not making any promises about results. Kellen chuckled, the sound dry and humorless. I guess we'll have to make it up as we go along. Not like we've got much choice. With the crew dispersed to their respective gripes and tasks, Kellen found himself in the mess hall once more, staring down the food dispenser with the kind of disdain usually reserved for politicians and used spaceship salesmen. You gonna give me something edible today? Or just another excuse to reconsider cannibalism? He asked it, fully aware of the futility in talking to machines. The dispenser whirred and spat out a glob of something that might once have been nutritious. Kellen held up the tray, eyeing the contents with suspicion. Could be worse, he muttered. Could be yesterday's leftovers. Iris joined him, sliding onto the bench with her own tray of nondescript sludge. So, what's the plan, fearless leader? Survive, Kellen said simply. If Earth's really out of the picture for now, we're gonna have to buckle down, get creative with what we've got. Creativity's not exactly my strong suit, Iris admitted, poking at her meal. Though I might be able to fashion this into a passable brick. Build a house with Jax suggested, plopping down across from them. Might hold up better than this tin can we're living in. The mess hall's overhead lights flickered, as if in agreement. Kellen gestured around them. We've got a colony to keep running. I say we focus on what we can control. Get these systems stable, ration supplies, and figure out how to stretch everything as far as it'll go. And what about the miners? Iris asked. They're gonna need more than just a pep talk if we're stuck here for a while. Kellen nodded, his expression thoughtful. Keep busy. Jobs, maintenance, anything that keeps their minds off the situation. Last thing we need is a mutiny with a side of chaos. See, this is why you're in charge, Jax said, tapping his spoon against the table. You've got that whole leadership thing down. Me, I'd just run around screaming, we're doomed, until someone slapped me. Don't tempt me, Iris said, though her smile took the edge off her words. Kellen chuckled, shaking his head. Let's just focus on keeping everything from falling apart. Anything beyond that, we'll deal with as it comes. Jax raised his spoon in a mock toast. To survival, and whatever the hell comes next. Kellen echoed the gesture, though his face was grim. To survival. They ate in silence, broken only by the occasional clatter of trays and the murmur of distant conversation. The mess hall, like the rest of the colony, was a place of tired faces and dwindling hope. As the meal wound down, Kellen glanced around at his crew, their expressions mirroring his own sense of weary determination. They were all in this together, and for better or worse, they'd make it work. Even if it killed them. Back in the comms bay, Iris was once again hunched over the unit, trying to squeeze more information from the stubborn device. Kellen joined her, his presence as much a comfort as it was a burden. Any luck? He asked, though he didn't expect a different answer than before. Not a lot, she replied, not looking up. If there's more to get, it's buried under layers of static and interference. Could be days before we crack it. Days we might not have, Kellen sighed. But it's something. They worked in silence for a while, the only sound the incessant hum of the comms and the occasional beep of a button. It was a familiar rhythm, one they'd settled into out of necessity rather than choice. What do you think's happening on Earth right now? Iris asked, breaking the quiet. Probably not much different than here, Kellen said. Except with more screaming. And fire. Lots of fire. Iris chuckled, though the sound held little humor. Fire would be a step up from this cold metal box. And here I thought you liked the minimalist aesthetic, Kellen teased. Not when it involves potential death by starvation. Fair point. They continued their work, each moment a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. They were isolated, cut off from the world they once knew, and tasked with surviving against odds that seemed increasingly insurmountable. And yet, they persevered. Because giving up wasn't an option. Not now, not ever. In the grand scheme of things, they were just a small blip on the radar of the universe. But they were a blip that refused to fade quietly into the night. Kellen's focus returned to the task at hand, the weight of his responsibilities never far from his mind. They'd keep fighting, keep pushing forward, because that was the only thing they knew how to do. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. In the dimly lit mess hall, a crowd of misfits gathered like moths drawn to a flickering bulb. The smell of recycled air and questionable food hung heavy, a constant reminder of their predicament. The miners were restless, like a pack of dogs with nowhere to run, and murmurs of dissent buzzed like angry bees. Abandoning Mars for Earth. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Tarek, a beefy miner with a penchant for worst-case scenarios, spoke them with all the gravity of a man declaring war. At least there, we might find something to survive on. Jax leaned back, arms crossed, looking more amused than alarmed. Ah, yes, let's gallop back to Earth on our noble steeds. If the radiation doesn't get us, the chaos will. Stellar plan, Tarek. Tarek grunted, unimpressed by sarcasm. Better than rotting here, waiting for supplies that ain't coming. Kellen stepped in, his presence like a bucket of cold water on a simmering fire. You think Earth is a picnic now? From what we've heard, it's more like a barbecue, and with the entree. Yeah, well, Tarek shot back, his jaw set like a stubborn mule. At least down there, we can die trying. Or just die, Iris added dryly, her eyes never leaving the contents of her plate, which was doing a fine impression of a culinary disaster. Kellen sighed, rubbing his temples. Look, hopping back to Earth isn't an option. We've got to focus on what's in front of us. What's in front of us is a slow death, Tarek said, his voice a growl. Unless you've got a magic wand hidden somewhere, Captain. Kellen met his gaze, unwavering. I've got something better, a plan. The room quieted, all eyes on Kellen. He had their attention, for now. We need to know more about what went wrong on Earth. If we can understand the scope, maybe, just maybe, we can find a workaround. Sounds like a lot of ifs and maybes, Jax said, eyebrows raised. But hey, I'm all for a little adventure. Adventure, huh? Iris smirked. Thought that was just a fancy word for screwing up spectacularly. Depends on your perspective, Kellen replied. But it beats sitting here twiddling our thumbs. Tarek folded his arms, clearly unconvinced. How are you gonna find out more? We can't exactly hitch a ride down to Earth and ask the neighbors for a cup of sugar. Delta Station might have some answers, Kellen suggested. They were closer to the whole fiasco than we were. Assuming their comms hold up long enough for a chat, Iris pointed out. But it's a start. Kellen nodded, feeling the weight of their collective hopelessness shifting slightly. But we need a team to work on this, he continued. Anyone who's in, stay behind after chow. With a decisive clatter, trays were abandoned, and the miners began to disperse. Tarek lingered, caught between skepticism and the flicker of something almost like hope. Guess I'll stick around, he muttered, as if the admission pained him. Great, Jack said with a grin. We can bond over software glitches and existential dread. The mess hall cleared out, leaving Kellen, Iris, Jax, and Tarek. A ragtag bunch, but they were what he had. All right, Kellen said, let's get to work. In the comms bay, the team huddled around the flickering screen like acolytes at a techno-religion, the hum of machinery a hymn of desperation. So, what are we looking for exactly? Jax asked, squinting at the static-laden display. Directions to Earth's newest hellscape. More like a missing piece of the puzzle, Kellen replied. Any data on the experiment, what went wrong, why it's localized to Earth. Anything at all. Sounds simple enough, Iris said, her voice laced with resignation. As long as Delta Station's feeling chatty. Tarek, you're on antenna duty, Kellen ordered. See if our signal can handle a little distance flirting. Tarek grumbled, but he moved to the controls, his fingers surprisingly deft. Let's see if I can sweet-talk this hunk of junk. As Tarek fiddled with the dials, Jax drummed his fingers on a nearby console. So, we find out what happened, then what? We MacGyver our way out of this. Something like that, Kellen replied. The more we know, the better our chances. Assuming there's anything left to fix, Iris said, her eyes reflecting the cold glow of the screens. We could be chasing shadows. Better than sitting in the dark, Kellen said, his voice firm. And who knows, maybe we'll stumble on something useful. Like a guide to not screwing up the planet, Jax chuckled. Probably worth its weight in gold about now. Here we go, Tarek announced, his tone holding a note of triumph. I think I've got them. The comm screen sputtered, then steadied, a crackling voice breaking through the static. Delta Station, this is Mars Base Alpha. Do you copy? The voice on the other end was faint, but steady. Affirmative, Alpha. Receiving you loud and clear. Great to hear, Kellen said, relief coloring his voice. We need information on the terraforming project. Anything you can give us. A pause, then a reply, crackling with cosmic interference. Project, classified, but, major malfunction, miscalculation in environmental parameters. Typical, Iris muttered. Can't even count on scientists to do math right. Kellen leaned in, urgency in his voice. What about containment? Why only Earth? Earth's atmosphere, unique variables. Mars and outer colonies. Safe, for now. For now? Tarek echoed, his skepticism palpable. That's comforting. We're working on solutions, the voice from Delta Station continued. But it'll take time. Kellen nodded, mostly to himself. Time's not exactly on our side. Any advice for us? Stay put. Stay safe. We'll keep you updated. The connection fizzled out, leaving them with more questions than answers. Kellen leaned back, letting the silence settle around them like dust. Well, Jack said, breaking the quiet. That was helpful. We know nothing new except that we're still screwed. But at least we're not alone in the screwing, Iris pointed out. Misery loves company, right? Kellen ran a hand through his hair, a hint of fatigue creeping into his voice. So, we keep on keeping on. Maintain the systems, look for more intel, and hope Delta figures something out. And in the meantime, we keep the miners from revolting, Tarek added. That's a job in itself. Tell me about it, Kellen said with a wry smile. If anyone's got ideas for that, I'm all ears. Jax raised a hand, his expression earnest. How about a talent show? I'll do my world-famous impression of a miner who's not completely losing it. Can we skip to the part where you show off an actual talent? Iris shot back, earning a chuckle from Tarek. Kellen laughed, the sound a rare break in the tension. If it keeps them from tearing the place apart, I'm willing to try anything. With their makeshift plan in place, the group began to disperse, each with their own thoughts on the precariousness of their situation. Kellen lingered a moment longer, staring at the comms, hoping for some miracle to blaze through the static. No miracle came, but the hum of the machinery was as close to a promise as he was likely to get. A promise that they could do this, that they could hold this ragged little colony together just long enough to see the other side of disaster. As Kellen turned to leave, Iris caught his arm. You holding up, fearless leader? Ask me again in a week, he said with a tired grin. Who knows, I might have a better answer. Or we might be dead, she added, her voice light but her gaze serious. Same difference, he said with a shrug. Either way, we'll find out. They parted ways, and Kellen headed back to his quarters, the weight of leadership a constant companion. He could feel the fractures in the crew, the desperation like a pressure cooker about to blow. But he'd keep them together, even if it killed him. As he settled into the Spartan comfort of his bunk, he allowed himself a moment of quiet introspection. They were out here in the void, isolated and alone, with only each other to rely on. And maybe that was enough. The Martian landscape outside the base had never looked so inviting, which was saying something because Mars generally looked like a rust-colored hellscape on a good day. But now, with a storm rolling in that could strip paint off steel and communication cut like a bad haircut, the view was downright enchanting. Inside the mess hall, the atmosphere was a cocktail of dread and boredom. The miners huddled around the flickering comm screen, hoping for any sign of life from Delta Station or Earth. No such luck. The storm had hit them like a cosmic middle finger, and they were stuck in the silence of the damned. Well, this is cozy, Jax quipped, breaking the oppressive quiet. A bunch of grizzled miners playing house in a tin can while hell rages outside. Tarek grunted, his default response to everything. We're sitting ducks. If something doesn't change, we'll be more like floating corpses. Always the optimist, Tarek, Iris said, her tone dry enough to soak up the Martian dust. You should try switching to decaf. Kellen, the ever-calm center of this chaotic universe, leaned against a bulkhead, arms crossed. All right, enough doomsday talk. We've got a storm outside and no way to call for help. What's the worst-case scenario? Death by boredom, Jax offered, earning a chuckle from Iris. Running out of food and water, Tarek said, ever the buzzkill. And don't forget the air filters. They ain't gonna last forever. Right, Kellen nodded, rubbing his temples. So, we've got to be smart about this. Ration supplies, conserve power. Keep the air filtration running longer than Tarek's list of complaints. Hey, I'm just being practical. Tarek shot back, arms folded across his chest like a defensive fortress. We should focus on survival. How about we start with fixing the damn comms? Iris suggested, eyeing the static-laden screen. If we can get a signal out, maybe we stand a chance. And if not, Jax said with a grin, we can always start a band. The Martian Miners. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Kellen gave a wry smile. Alright folks, let's divide and conquer. Jax, Tarek, you two figure out the comms. Iris, you're with me on supplies. We need to stretch what we've got. As they broke up, the weight of their situation pressed down like a lead blanket. Outside, the storm howled, a reminder of nature's indifference. But inside, in their little corner of the universe, they were going to fight, even if it meant fighting each other. Down in the dimly lit guts of the base, Jax and Tarek were doing their best impression of electricians. The comms unit, a masterpiece of half-baked engineering and cosmic neglect, sat before them like a puzzle missing half its pieces. Any bright ideas? Tarek asked, poking at a panel with all the enthusiasm of a kid forced to eat vegetables. Other than banging it with a hammer, Jax replied, frowning at the mess of wires. Not really, but hey, maybe we can turn it into a toaster. That'd be useful, right? Not unless you're planning to toast Martian sand, Tarek said, glowering at the comms unit. We need something that actually works. Well, maybe if we reroute power from the life support, Jax began, then paused as Tarek's eyes widened. Kidding. You know, you're really not as funny as you think. Tarek grumbled, but there was a hint of a smile. Jax shrugged, his grin unshakable. It's a gift. Now, let's see if we can get this piece of junk to sing. Their fingers danced over the controls, twisting dials and flipping switches with something that resembled skill. Or desperation. Hard to tell the difference up here. Slowly, painstakingly, the unit sputtered to life, crackling with static. Hello, anyone out there? Jax said into the mic, his voice a beacon in the void. This is Mars Base Alpha. Over. The only response was more static, a cosmic laugh track mocking their efforts. But Jax wasn't ready to give up. He tweaked the frequency, hoping for a miracle or at least a sign of life. Come on, little buddy, he muttered to the comms unit. Don't let me down. Meanwhile, in the supply room, Iris and Kellen were knee-deep in cans of mystery meat and water packets that probably expired before most of the crew was born. Inventory's looking grim, Iris said, picking up a can and examining it with distaste. This stuff's older than Tarek's sense of humor. Kellen grimaced, holding up a water packet. We might have to get creative. You ever heard of a zero-calorie diet? Great, we'll lose weight while we lose everything else, Iris replied, not missing a beat. But seriously, we've got to make this stretch. Agreed, Kellen said, stacking cans like he was building a monument to scarcity. Any chance we can supplement with something? Yeah, if you count Martian dirt as a food group, Iris replied. I think we're officially out of options. Silence settled in as they continued their grim task. Rationing was a dance of desperation and denial, and neither of them had the right shoes. But they kept at it, because that's what you did when you were stuck between a rock and a hard vacuum. Think we'll make it? Iris asked, breaking the quiet with a question that was equal parts hope and fear. Depends on what you mean by make it, Kellen replied, his voice tinged with weary humor. Survive, maybe. Thrive, not unless we discover edible Martian mushrooms. Right. I'll start growing a garden next to Jax's toaster, Iris said, rolling her eyes. Guess we'll just have to find a way. Kellen nodded, feeling the weight of leadership like a chain around his neck. Yeah, we will. The hours slipped away, a sluggish river of time that carried them closer to the unknown. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up, and the base creaked and groaned under the pressure, a ship adrift on a sea of red dust. Back in the mess hall, the crew gathered once more, their faces etched with weary resolve. Kellen stood before them, the reluctant captain of a ship with no sails but plenty of holes. All right, here's the deal, he said, addressing his makeshift family. We're low on supplies and cut off from the rest of the universe. But we're not giving up. What's the plan, Cap'n? Jax asked, arms crossed but eyes alight with mischief. Let me guess, we start knitting sweaters out of dust. Close, Kellen said with a smirk. We keep trying the comms, ration supplies, and hope for a break in the storm. Until then, we stay sharp and stick together. And pray for miracles, Tarek added, his voice a low rumble. Or at least a change in the weather. Exactly, Kellen agreed. Anything else is just noise. We focus on what we can control. The crew nodded, their silence a pact of determination. They were miners, after all, used to digging deep and fighting through the dirt to find what mattered. If nothing else, Iris said, her voice cutting through the gloom, at least we've got each other to complain to. And complain we will, Jax promised, grinning. It's the Martian way. Despite the gravity of their situation, a chuckle rippled through the group, a brief spark of warmth in the chill of isolation. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For now, as the crew dispersed, Kellen lingered, his eyes on the storm beyond the reinforced windows. It was a monster, all right, but not unbeatable. Not as long as they had each other and a sliver of hope. Hey, Iris said, stepping up beside him. You did good, back there. Thanks, Kellen replied, meeting her gaze. But it's not over yet. No, she agreed, but we'll get through it. One way or another. Kellen nodded, feeling the weight lift, if only for a moment. Yeah, we will. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the walls of Mars Base Alpha, a different kind of storm was brewing. One of resilience, camaraderie, and an unyielding will to survive. And for now, that was enough to keep the darkness at bay. The storm outside Mars Base Alpha continued to thrash and howl like a drunken god, determined to remind the universe just how inconsequential a group of scrappy miners really were. But inside, the miners had a different kind of thunder brewing. Kellen found himself staring at a map of Mars, the holographic display flickering like an old neon sign in a dying city. This was their world now, a dusty sandbox where hope was as scarce as a decent meal from the food dispenser. What's the plan, fearless leader? Jax asked, sidling up with all the finesse of a cat burglar in a junkyard. Gonna paint a bullseye on the storm and hope it gets embarrassed and goes away. Something like that, Kellen replied, eyes not leaving the map. But first, Iris and I are going to do a bit of exploring. Exploring? Iris chimed in, her eyebrow arching with all the amusement of someone who's seen it all. You didn't mention anything about a leisure hike. Just found something interesting on this map, Kellen said, tapping a spot that looked as unassuming as any other piss-colored blotch on Mars. Some kind of facility. Could be nothing, but it's not listed in any of our records. So, either it's a secret Martian resort, or the place where they hid the good food, Jax quipped. Either way, worth a look. Tarek grunted from his corner, as usual. Or it's a death trap. But hey, what's life without a bit of risk, right? Exactly, Kellen said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. It's a long shot, but if there's even a chance it holds something that can help us, we have to check it out. All right, I'm in, Iris said, grabbing a jacket that had seen better days. Beats sitting around counting canned peas. With their motley crew in agreement, Kellen, Iris, Jax, and Tarek geared up and prepared to brave the storm. It was like planning a picnic in the middle of a hurricane, but with more sarcasm and less sunscreen. The surface of Mars was even less welcoming up close. The wind tore at their suits like a jealous ex, and the red dust clung to them with the tenacity of a tax collector. But at least it wasn't boring. Remind me why we didn't choose a nice, sunny beach as our career path, Jax shouted over the roar of the storm, his words nearly lost to the wind. Because we're idiots with questionable life choices, Iris shot back, trudging through the endless expanse of Martian misery. Hey, speak for yourselves, Tarek said, ever the voice of cheer. I was promised adventure and excitement. What you got was a death sentence with a side of sand, Kellen replied, leading the way like the world's most reluctant tour guide. Keep your eyes peeled. Facility should be just over this ridge. They reached the crest of the hill, and there it was, a small, nondescript building half buried in Martian dust. It looked about as inviting as a government office, but to the crew, it was the most intriguing thing they'd seen in weeks. Well, I'll be damned, Jax said, shading his eyes against the red glare. Looks like someone forgot to mention this little gem. Probably because it's another failure waiting to happen, Tarek muttered, ever the optimist. Only one way to find out, Kellen said, and they made their way down, drawn to the building like moths to a potentially explosive flame. The door creaked open with a shove and a grunt, the universal language of stubborn machinery. Inside, the air was stale but breathable, a small mercy in a world of constant challenges. What do you think this place was for? Iris asked, her voice echoing in the empty space. Could be an abandoned lab, Kellen said, scanning the room with the sharp eye of someone who's learned not to trust appearances. Or maybe a storage facility. Either way, it's got power. They moved deeper into the building, rooms revealing themselves with reluctant obedience. Lab equipment, dusty consoles, and more misplaced paperwork than a government audit. But it was the central console that caught their attention, a sleek, black piece of tech that hummed with the promise of secrets. Well, Jax said, his fingers dancing over the keys. Looks like someone left the lights on. What is it? Tarek asked, peering over Jax's shoulder like a disinterested hawk. Data logs, Jax replied, eyes scanning the screen. Lots of them. Some even mention terraforming protocols. Exactly what we need, Kellen said, the hope flickering in his voice like a candle in the wind. Let's see what we can dig up. For the next few hours, the team pored over the data, mining for gold among a sea of technical gobbledygook. It was tedious work, the kind that made even watching paint dry seem like a rollercoaster of thrills. But they found what they were looking for, a series of research logs detailing experiments to reverse the effects of failed terraforming protocols. Are you seeing this? Iris asked, her excitement barely contained. These notes, they suggest a way to stabilize the atmosphere. It's a theory, Tarek cautioned, skepticism practically dripping off him. And you know how much scientists love their theories. Yeah, but it's a theory with potential, Kellen said, trying to inject some optimism into the conversation. Look, we're stuck here with no supplies and no way home. We might as well try. Jax leaned back, a grin spreading across his face. Feels like we're in one of those old Earth movies. You know, the ones where the plucky heroes save the day with their wits and charm. Except we're miners, not heroes, Iris reminded him. And our charm is about as useful as a solar panel in a cave. Still, Kellen said, his resolve hardening like Martian rock. We've got nothing to lose. Let's see if we can make this work. Back at the base, the team dove headfirst into the data, the room filled with the electric hum of possibilities. Each member took on a task, dissecting the information, translating theory into potential action. This thing's got more jargon than a politician, Jax said, trying to untangle the mess of science speak. Is there a manual for this stuff somewhere? Welcome to the cutting edge of desperation, Iris replied, her focus unyielding. But hey, if we can crack this, maybe we won't have to eat dust for the rest of our lives. Or die trying, Tarek added, because someone had to be the harbinger of doom. Thanks for the pep talk, Kellen said, eyeing the diagrams with a mix of doubt and determination. Let's just focus on getting this right. If it's our last shot, we better make it count. Over the next few days, the base became a hive of frenzied activity. Wires were rerouted, codes deciphered, and more than a few angry words exchanged over stubborn circuits and uncooperative data. Hey, if this works, maybe we'll get a statue on Earth or something, Jax suggested, his grin unshakable. Sure, right next to the statue of the guy who invented the food dispenser, Iris replied, rolling her eyes. But bit by bit, progress was made. The facility's latent capabilities were coaxed back to life under their relentless, if somewhat haphazard, ministrations. The harsh reality of their situation was tempered by the hope that this hidden treasure could turn the tide and give them a fighting chance. Finally, after days of effort, they stood back to admire the fruits of their labor, a recalibrated sequence ready to be tested. Moment of truth, Kellen said, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. Here goes nothing. He activated the sequence, the console lighting up with a life of its own. The team watched in breathless anticipation, eyes fixed on the screen as it processed the new data. Please don't blow up, Jax muttered, half prayer, half joke. The console hummed, then beeped, a sound so ordinary it was extraordinary in the silence of the room. Finally, a series of green lights flickered on, one after another, like a cosmic slot machine paying out against all odds. It worked, Iris breathed, disbelief and relief mingling in her voice. It actually worked. Don't look so surprised, Kellen said, a smile breaking through his usual mask of calm. Looks like we might just have a chance after all. So, what's next? Tarek asked, the first glimmer of hope softening his features. We implement the changes, Kellen said, the weight of their situation lifting, if only slightly. And then we hope for the best. Hope, Jax echoed, the word strange on his tongue. Guess we haven't tried that in a while. The room fell silent, save for the soft hum of machinery now aligned with their plans. They were still a long way from safety, but they'd taken the first step on a road that might just lead them back from the brink. All right, Iris said, her voice regaining its usual edge. Let's get to work before the universe decides it wants to mess with us again. With renewed purpose, the team set about the task of implementing their newfound knowledge. It wasn't going to be easy, not by a long shot, but they were miners, used to delving into the dark and clawing their way to the light. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like they might just be able to turn Martian dust into gold. The atmosphere inside Mars Base Alpha was buzzing with a mix of nervous energy and caffeine-induced fervor. The kind of energy you get when you realize the fate of two planets might just rest in the hands of a ragtag group of miners who were about as qualified for this as a goldfish was qualified to scale Mount Everest. Kellen stood at the center of this chaos, the holographic display in front of him flickering like a stuttering old movie reel. He was trying to look confident, but it was the kind of confidence you wore when you were bluffing your way through a job interview for a position you had no experience in. All right, team, we've got our orders. Let's make some history, or at least a good footnote, Kellen announced, trying to sound more leader-like than he felt. Remember when history was just something you failed in school? Jax muttered, his fingers tapping away at the console with the enthusiasm of a disgruntled teenager texting during a family dinner. Yeah, and now we're the ones writing it, Iris replied, her eyes glued to the screen as she deciphered lines of code that looked more like a cat had walked across a keyboard. Tarek, ever the picture of skepticism, grunted from his corner. Hope you're all ready for the Nobel Prize in Survival, because I hear the competition's fierce this year. You know what they say about hope, Kellen said, echoing their earlier conversations. It's the thing with feathers that gets sucked into engines and causes catastrophic failures. As they worked, the Martian storm outside continued its relentless assault on the base, the howling wind a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. It was like trying to concentrate on a delicate operation while someone practiced heavy metal guitar solos in the background. The plan, if you could call it that, was simple. Send a corrective signal to Earth using the unlisted facility's equipment. A signal that would, with any luck, reverse the detrimental effects of the failed terraforming protocols and prevent Earth from becoming a radioactive wasteland. Of course, the fact that they had to send it during a storm that made hurricanes look like mild breezes was just the universe's way of keeping things interesting. Hey, Kellen, Jax called out, his voice laced with the kind of sarcasm that could strip paint. Do you think they'll name a holiday after us once we save Earth? Kellen Day has a nice ring to it. Only if it involves everyone sitting around, doing nothing, and occasionally panicking, Iris chimed in, her fingers dancing over the console like she was playing an avant-garde piano piece. Kellen smirked, trying to ignore the way his heart was doing a tango with his stomach. I'll settle for a day where nobody tries to kill each other for the last can of beans. Ambitious, Tarek rumbled, his voice dry as Martian dust. But you always were a dreamer. With everything set, it was time for the big moment. They'd prepped as much as they could, and it was now or never. The tension in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife, assuming you'd brought one to Mars. All right, folks, Kellen said, trying to inject some confidence into his voice. Let's do this. Jax, hit it. Jax executed the command, and the console lit up, data racing across the screen faster than a politician backpedaling on a campaign promise. They all held their breath, watching as the corrective signal was sent rocketing through the cosmos like a digital Hail Mary. Come on, Iris murmured, as if willing the universe to cooperate through sheer force of will. The signal traveled through the vast emptiness of space, a flicker of hope against the backdrop of cosmic indifference. It was a gamble, a Hail Mary pass in a game where the stakes were astronomically high. Do you think it's actually going to work? Tarek asked, his skepticism battling with the smallest glimmer of hope in his eyes. Let's just say I've got a good feeling about this, Kellen replied, hoping that optimism was contagious. The signal's journey was fraught with potential pitfalls, each one a reminder of how fragile their plan truly was. For all they knew, it could end up bouncing off a random satellite and broadcasting their greatest failure to the universe instead. Silence stretched, every second feeling like an eternity. The room was tense with anticipation, each member of the team lost in their thoughts about what success, or failure, might mean. Then, the console beeped. Once, twice, and finally, a third time. A trio of beeps that echoed in the silence like a series of divine affirmations. Is that a good sound? Jax asked, his voice a hopeful whisper. Iris checked the readouts, her face breaking into a smile brighter than the Martian sun. It means it's working. The signal's been received. A cheer went up. A sound of triumph so rare and unexpected that it felt almost alien in their little corner of the universe. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd managed to pull off the impossible. For a moment, the crushing weight of their reality was lifted, replaced by a sense of accomplishment that was almost intoxicating. We might actually have saved Earth, Kellen said, disbelief coloring his words. Not bad for a bunch of miners, huh? Jax grinned, leaning back in his chair with the satisfaction of a man who'd just won a bet against the devil. Saved it for now, Tarek interjected, ever the reminder of the harsh truths still looming over them. We've still got our own mess to deal with. Yeah, but at least we know it can be done, Iris said, her voice resolute. And that's worth something. As the initial euphoria began to fade, the reality of their situation settled back in. They'd bought Earth some time, but their own future was as uncertain as ever. Supplies were still scarce, and the storm outside showed no signs of letting up. They'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. So, what's next? Jax asked, breaking the contemplative silence. Kellen looked around at his team, the people who'd somehow become family through shared hardship and gallows humor. We keep fighting, he said, the resolve in his voice undeniable. Mars might have thrown us a curveball, but we've shown we can hit back. The mood in the room shifted, determination replacing the earlier jubilation. They were still miners, still outcasts on a desolate planet, but they were also something more, survivors in a universe that seemed dead set on proving them wrong. Let's not get too comfortable, Tarek warned, his voice gruff but not unkind. We've still got to make sure we can hold on until help arrives. Yeah, assuming anyone's coming, Jax said, his tone light but his words carrying a weight of truth. We'll make it, Kellen said, his voice firm, as if stating a fact rather than a hope. We've come this far, after all. With the Martian storm still howling outside, the crew returned to their tasks, bolstered by their success but aware of the challenges that lay ahead. They might not have all the answers, and their situation might still be dire, but they'd proven they could rise to the occasion when it mattered most. And in the dark expanse of space, where hope was as rare as oxygen, that was something worth holding on to. The dusty air of Mars Base Alpha hung heavy with the kind of smell you'd expect from a place that had seen more despair than a funeral home on a good day. But today, there was a different scent wafting through the corridors, a whiff of hope, tinged with disbelief, as if the universe had accidentally sent him a batch of optimism instead of the usual desolation. Kellen leaned against the flickering comm screen, trying to act nonchalant about the fact they'd just potentially saved Earth. It was a bit like trying to look cool while riding a unicycle. Everyone knew it was a balancing act, and you were one wobble away from disaster. Well, that went better than expected, he said, scratching at the stubble on his chin. Better than expected is how I describe a meal from the food dispenser, Jax quipped, tapping at the console with the kind of familiarity that comes from repeated attempts to coax life from a machine that had given up the ghost long ago. This was a goddamn miracle. I'd have settled for a miracle with a little less storm and a lot more cocktails, Iris added, her eyes lifting from the screen for the first time in hours. The lines of code had started to blur together, forming shapes that could either be the solution to interstellar travel or an abstract portrait of a cat vomiting. Tarek crossed his arms, a skeptical sentinel in their midst. Just because we pulled it off doesn't mean we're off the hook. Earth's problems are like cockroaches, squash one, and a million more come scuttling out. Nice analogy, Iris said, wrinkling her nose. Just what I needed to hear when I'm about to eat dinner. Hey, at least we've got something to eat, Kellen replied, shrugging. Even if it tastes like it was made by someone who's never actually tasted real food. They all knew the gravity of their success. Earth had been teetering on the edge, a step away from becoming the universe's largest microwavable disaster. But with the corrective signals sent, they'd managed to pull it back from the brink. It wasn't a solution, more like a temporary patch on a sinking ship, but it was something. So, do we get medals or something? Jax asked, a grin playing on his lips. Maybe a shiny certificate of, not totally useless. More like a pat on the back and a, good luck, you're still screwed, Tarek replied, his usual dry humor punctuating the moment. Despite everything, they'd done what they set out to do, and that counted for something. The Martian storm outside still howled like a banshee with a vendetta, but inside, they'd quieted a storm of their own, even if just for a moment. All right, team, Kellen said, pushing off the console. We've saved Earth, now we need to save ourselves. Any bright ideas? Depends, Iris replied. You got a magic wand tucked away with those emergency rations? Sadly, the only magic I've got is enough duct tape to MacGyver a solution to just about anything, Kellen said, gesturing to the tools of their trade, scattered about like breadcrumbs in a tragic, lost picnic. Good thing, too, Jack said, not looking up from his screen. Because I've just about had it with surprise, storms and unexpected supply shortages. We can't count on miracles forever, Tarek said, his voice a low rumble. We've got to make sure we're not just waiting for the next disaster to hit. It was a sobering thought, but one that had been lingering at the edges of their minds since they first set foot on this godforsaken planet. Mars was as unforgiving as a casino dealer with a vendetta and about as likely to give you a fair shake. We need to keep the air fresh, food in our bellies, and our sanity intact, Iris said, ticking off points on her fingers. In that order. No arguments here, Kellen said, taking a deep breath. Let's get back to work. Work, as it turned out, was a constant companion on Mars. There was always something to fix, something to maintain, some little detail that, if overlooked, could spell disaster. It was like trying to keep a jalopy running on wishes and spit. One wrong move, and you'd be pushing it up the highway of doom. The team set about their tasks, each member falling into the rhythm they knew so well. It was the kind of routine that kept them sane, kept them from spiraling into the abyss of despair that loomed at the edge of every waking thought. Kellen found himself in the mess hall, staring at the food dispenser as if it might suddenly decide to serve something edible. Come on, buddy, he muttered, giving it a gentle thump. Surprise me. The machine whirred to life, spitting out something that looked vaguely like mashed potatoes if you squinted and had recently suffered a head injury. He stared at it, wondering if this was what it had come to, celebrating the minor victories, like food that didn't actively try to kill you. Looks appetizing, Jack said, leaning against the doorframe, a smirk on his face. It's all in the presentation, Kellen replied, lifting the tray with a flourish. And the ability to ignore your taste buds. Exactly why I've stopped using mine, Jax said. Easier that way. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that only comes from sharing countless meals in the shadow of uncertainty. Each bite was a reminder of what they had, what they'd lost, and what they still hoped to gain. So, what's the plan, boss? Jax asked, finally breaking the silence. We just gonna hang out here until the next storm rolls in and sweeps us off to Neverland. Not if I can help it, Kellen said, setting his tray aside. We need to make a move, find out what's really going on in that unlisted facility, see if there's anything we can use. Sounds like a suicide mission with a side of insanity, Jax said. Sign me up, that's the spirit, Kellen said, grinning despite himself. The prospect of exploring the unlisted facility was both daunting and exhilarating. It promised answers they desperately needed but also held the potential for more danger than they'd seen yet. As the team gathered in the control room, the storm continued to rage outside, a constant reminder of the hostile world they called home. But inside, there was a different kind of storm brewing, one fueled by determination, by the refusal to accept their fate as a foregone conclusion. We need to stick together on this, Kellen said, addressing the team. We've gotten this far, but we're not out of the woods yet. Iris nodded, her eyes sharp with resolve. We'll make it. I didn't come all the way to Mars to end up as a footnote in a history book. More like a cautionary tale, Tarek added, a grim smile on his lips. Kellen looked at each of them in turn, feeling the weight of their expectations, their hopes, their fears. They were miners, not heroes, but they'd proven that even the most unlikely of people could rise to the occasion when it mattered most. All right, he said, drawing a deep breath. Let's get to it. They moved with purpose and unity, each task a step closer to understanding the truth behind the unlisted facility and what it might mean for their survival. It was a gamble, but every move they'd made so far had been part of the same high-stakes game. Hey, if we find something good, you think they'll throw us a parade back on Earth? Jax asked, his voice light but his eyes serious. Maybe, Kellen replied, his tone matching Jax's. Or they'll just ask us to fix the next mess. Better than sitting around waiting for doom to knock on the door, Iris said, her hands deftly working at the console. Yeah, and besides, Tarek added, who wouldn't want their name etched in the annals of minor history? History's written by the survivors, Kellen said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. And we intend to be the ones writing it. With their spirits bolstered by a renewed sense of purpose, the team continued their preparations, each task a reminder of the fight they'd chosen. The storm outside showed no signs of abating, but they were miners, people who delved into the depths, who faced darkness head-on and emerged on the other side. The unlisted facility loomed in their minds, a beacon of both hope and fear. It promised answers, solutions, maybe even a way off this rock, but it also carried the weight of the unknown, the potential for disaster that had become their constant companion. As they worked, a silence settled over the room, a silence filled with the hum of machinery, the tap of fingers on keys, the rustle of tools. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words, a testament to their determination to see this through to the end. Hey, Kellen, Jax said, breaking the silence with a smile. What do you think the unlisted facility's hiding? Treasure, aliens, a really good pizza place? Honestly, Kellen replied, returning Jax's grin. I'm hoping for a spaceship, or at least a good cup of coffee. I'd settle for a spaceship powered by coffee, Iris quipped, her focus never wavering from the screen. Tarek chuckled, the sound rumbling through the room like distant thunder. If anyone can find it, it's us. They were a ragtag group, held together by a shared goal and a stubborn refusal to give up. They might not have been heroes in the traditional sense, but they were survivors, each of them tempered by the fire of adversity. As the storm outside continued to rage, the team stood together, ready to face whatever lay ahead. They might not know what the future held, but they knew one thing for certain, they'd face it together, come what may. And in the desolate, unforgiving landscape of Mars, that was a promise worth keeping.